This is the 2024 45-inch LG UltraGear gaming monitor, and as someone who has personally bought and used last year's 45-inch LG UltraGear, you might glance at this thinking it's the same as last year's model, but this model does have some nice upgrades which I'm a big fan of depending on your use case. Now this one is the 45GS96QB model, that's a bit of a mouthful, so let's start off with the unboxing experience. Now it's pretty straightforward and pain-free, and you could easily do this with just one person. In the box you get the power brick, the stand feet, along with the height adjustable stands, a cable management clip, plus cables for power, display ports, HDMI, and USB-C. Now to show how easy it is to unbox this just yourself, you just attach the stand whilst it's in the box, and then lift it out using the stand onto your desk. A quick thank you to LG for sending this monitor out and for sponsoring this video. I'm going to be putting this screen through various tests to show you what it's actually capable of and how it compares to my other favourite monitors right now. And also doing a bit of a side-by-side comparison with the Samsung G9 OLED. Now we're going to show you what sort of frame rates you can hit, run through some HDR brightness tests, and also point out a few things to consider before you buy one of these monitors for yourself. So let's cover these specs. Now this is a 45-inch OLED panel with a 21:9 aspect ratio with a beautiful 800R, really immersive curve, running at 3440 by 1440 with a 240 Hz refresh rate. Connectivity-wise, there are two HDMI 2.1 ports, one DisplayPort 1.4 port, and a USB-C with up to 65 watts power delivery. There's a 0.03 millisecond response time with variable refresh rate, as well as support for HDR10, FreeSync, G-Sync, all the good stuff. We've got picture-in-picture, picture-by-picture, built-in speakers, and a slew of just built-in features specifically for gamers. Now the monitor is also VESA certified for HDR True Black 400, which is an update on last year's model, and MLA Plus has been applied to the OLED panel, which improves the overall brightness of the panel, with the maximum brightness significantly improved over the previous model, now reaching up to 1300 nits. Now I've said this before, but I love a decent curve.
That's what she said.
Genuinely, when playing on these ultra-wide screens, having a deep curve like this is just way more enjoyable. I think 800R curve is probably the best curve to have specifically for gaming. There is no stretching to see the edges and less problems with reflections around the edges of the screen. Now, due to its size, you do have to look around a little when, playing games, but it is far more comfortable than, say, the 49-inch ultra-wide that I've been using before, or even the 57-inch ultra-wide, where like the heads-up displays and things like the mini-map are in the very, very far corners of the screen. This can make it really, really difficult to call in that, critical stratagem in Helldivers 2 whilst you're also trying to outrun a bile monster. But that is not a problem with the 45-inch LG UltraGear. And actually, whilst we're talking about the whole kind of screen size thing, with its 21:9 aspect ratio, you actually get more screen area than a 49-inch ultra-wide screen with a 32:9 aspect ratio. Now the 49-inch 32:9 actually gives you the same height as a 34-inch 21:9 monitor, so it's kind of like squeezing your view into this thin but very wide, very long display, whereas the 45-inch model does give you a larger overall screen, and one that does feel, using that word again, but more immersive when playing games. I actually managed to figure out the maths on this, so for the Samsung G9, the 49-inch model, there is a 4,059 centimeter squared screen area versus a 4550 centimeter squared on the LG, which is actually quite a difference. The screen also does a pretty good job of preventing any reflections, as you can see, mainly because of the curve, because when you're sat in the middle of this kind of screen, the curve naturally reflects, well, just like you. And given that we have the screen right next to a large window and loads of bright lights, I did worry that having the 800R curve would cause issues with like the window reflecting on one side of the screen. And you can see here that the anti-reflective coating on this screen actually does a really great job of minimizing reflections. It's actually pretty crazy that with bright lights on directly behind me and the window, you can barely see anything. And it's only when you take a bright light and literally like shine it directly onto the screen that it seems to be a problem, which won't be a problem for you unless you're shining torches onto your screen. So I have no concerns whatsoever of using this in challenging environments where you have like a bright light source like a big window or big lights around you. Next up, in terms of the design, hasn't really changed that much from last year's model. Now I'm a big fan of it, like really thin edges to show off how incredibly slim the OLED screens are, and chunkier in the middle, of course, where all the kind of clever tech is housed. There is the same sleek looking LED lighting on the back of the screen as last year's model. Big fan of how those look, but still not bright enough to notice when you back the screen up against a wall, unless the room is in total pitch black darkness. Now the stand also hasn't really changed that much. It's height adjustable, it pivots, there's a hook on the back for cable management. I was kind of hoping they would redesign the feet with this new model to a more flat design like we've seen with other ultra-wide screens lately. The problem with this design means that if you're using a shallow desk, the feet can take up a lot of your desk space, and then your ability to put anything under or near the screen, even something as simple as like a desk mat, can get quite tricky. Now I usually work around this by putting my screen on one of these Ergotron monitor arms because they just free up all of the desk space underneath the screen. And actually I recently picked up this new desk shelf from Bololo, I think it's called, and it has quickly become my favorite desk shelf of all time because of all the like add-ons you can attach, MagSafe chargers, a tablet holder, shelves. I've also got one that holds my MacBook Pro behind the screen in place. And unless you have a deeper desk like I'm using right now, you can't really do any of that when using the included stand. So yeah, big fan of using desk mounts to mount your monitors and like a proper desk arm and all those kind of things. Speaking of my MacBook, this is one of the upgrades that I am really pleased about this year. For connectivity, we now have a USB-C port with 65 watts power delivery, in addition to 2 HDMI 2.1 ports and 1 DisplayPort 1.4 port. Now, do I wish it was more than 65 watts? Yes. But is it enough for most people's usage? Also yes. And actually, Apple ships the M3 MacBook Pro that I'm using right now with a 70 watt power adapter, and you can then pay to upgrade for their like 96 watt adapter. So 65 watts will be just fine, unless you are doing what I would say consistent heavy productivity use, you know, video editing for like 5 to 10 hours a day, graphic design, you know, that kind of stuff, and for a long time to run down the battery. So unless you're doing that, you're likely not going to run into issues of running out of power at all using this. I don't. General day-to-day usage, it charges up my battery and I leave with 100% every single day. And actually, sticking with power usage for a moment, the LG consumes about 43 watts during like normal usage compared to around 75 watts for the Samsung 49-inch G9, which, considering you're getting a larger screen area on the LG, is actually pretty impressive and, you know, very economical if you're considering how much you're paying for your energy usage. And generally speaking, like I said, this isn't really a monitor for day-to-day productivity. It's definitely one that is geared towards pure like gaming use. By the way, if you are enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to the channel for more. I spend an awful lot of money buying all of these kind of screens for review, and your support makes all of the difference. There is also quite a big trend happening on YouTube with people buying views or buying subscribers to trick people into watching their content. But everything we've done with this channel has been purely down to you watching this content, so a huge thank you. And I'll also be holding on to this monitor for the foreseeable future, so if you have any questions, ask me in the comments down below. Now, I do try and reply to each and every question. As the channel kind of grows, it's getting quite challenging to do that, but I am doing my best. What I will say is I will either answer your questions down there in the comments down below, or if there are enough questions, I'll actually make a follow-up video to answer all of those questions like I've done previously for other widescreen monitors. Okay, let's talk resolution now. This screen runs at 3440 by 1440 at 240 Hertz and with a pixel density of 83.8 pixels per inch. So getting the perhaps seemingly obvious out of the way, 3440 by 1440 at 83.8 pixels per inch, that's a mouthful, isn't great when it comes to productivity. Now it's perfectly fine for gaming because of that, it helps you hit decent frame rates in games, and I'll run into kind of what to expect in just a moment. And more games support the 21:9 aspect ratio of the 45-inch UltraGear than say the 32:9 of a 49-inch or 57-inch ultra-wide. So you will actually get to benefit from using all of the display in more games. Again, like less looking around at the edges trying to find the mini-map or, you know, shortcuts to call in those stratagems on the Helldivers at the moment. But resolution aside, one thing I'm a huge fan of, actually over and beyond the Samsung G9 screens I reviewed on this channel over the past few years or so, is having a 240 Hertz refresh rate combined with USB-C. Now, as a Mac user, plugging in a single USB-C cable and actually getting full resolution at 240 Hertz refresh rate without like faffing around with settings and third-party software is so nice. Like, I can't get anything over 120 Hertz on Samsung's G9 screens, just flat out outright. And of course, for PC users, you'll also be able to get the full 240 Hz refresh rate on pretty much all modern graphics cards. I've recently had both the 7900 XTX and the 4090, and both of them get the full native resolution at 240 Hz. And actually some quick reading tells me you should be able to get, again, the full resolution at 240 Hz from at least a 3090 card or upwards. So over to some PC gaming now. Let's dig into the good stuff. Now, I recently spent a lot of my own money upgrading the gaming PC so I can start benchmarking various games with the monitors that I review on this channel. It is running an Intel i9 14900K, 32GB of memory, and a 4090 graphics card right now. Now, I'll have the full specs down below. Due to these specs, I generally set each game to their maximum graphics setting, so Ultra, Extreme, whatever it's going to be, and then use this to compare between the monitors. Now, I don't intend for these tests to be like proper benchmark tests, but they should give you a good indication of what to expect if you have a similar like high spec PC that I do. And if you're into like overclocking, then you can probably do much better than these results. These are just stock results, stock settings on the highest settings in their games. Starting off with my new favorite game, spreading glorious democracy in Helldivers 2, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite games. Plus, it is actually also really, really graphically demanding. We can see that the 45-inch LG UltraGear performs very, very well on Ultra. I did actually have some issues with this game being locked to 60 FPS, even though it wasn't locked in the game. But I realized that some new NVIDIA drivers came out, like, annoyingly, yesterday before I shot this video, so I had to rerun all of the comparisons with the new drivers installed, and that fixed the 60 FPS issues that I had in Helldivers 2. Next up was Cyberpunk. Thank you to the comments in my previous video saying that I wasn't running any graphically demanding games, so I went out to buy this game, and yeah, it's definitely graphically demanding. Only a little more so than Helldivers though in terms of FPS, but seeing much better performance again over the larger G9s. Again, this is of course due to the lower resolution, but it is that trade-off with a lower resolution but higher FPS. And the only thing you can do with the larger like 21:9 aspect ratio screens are to lower the resolution, at which point it either like stretches the image or you get black bars in the areas not in use. So at least with the LG, you are able to use that full width of the screen to get these results. Fortnite also has some impressive results. Consistently, I'm getting 10 to like 20 FPS more on the 45-inch LG UltraGear over the others I've tested so far. Warzone was probably the smallest improvement that I've noticed when playing, only like 10 to 15 FPS difference between the 49-inch G9 and the LG, but still noticeable. Forza Horizon 5 saw a really decent improvement, as did Overwatch. I do think Overwatch seems to be like the game to play where you can pretty much reach whatever FPS you want to hit if you play with the settings enough, like crazy high numbers there. But it is one of the few games that don't support the full 32:9 aspect ratio of the 57-inch G9, so there were black bars on the side, but even then, still much lower than the 49-inch and the 45-inch screens. So you can see you do get higher frame rates on the 45-inch LG UltraGear over something like the Samsung G9 OLED, and definitely the 57-inch G9, and that's because of course the lower resolution of the UltraGear with less pixels to drive. Now of course the resolution and frame rate per second will ultimately come down to how good your gaming PC is. I'm just very fortunate enough, it's kind of my job here, to have just upgraded my PC, but hopefully from these results you'll be able to see kind of the very best results possible, and actually if you spend enough time tweaking and overclocking, you can probably beat these results quite easily. I just kind of want to show you what you can expect without messing around too much. This is just everything stock, install by default, no playing with settings other than going into the game settings and changing it to Ultra or Extreme or whatever the kind of highest setting was. Now, performance aside, I would say that playing games on the 45-inch UltraGear felt more comfortable, and yeah, I hate to like say the words, but it feels more immersive than when on a 49-inch or like 57-inch screen. I think because it pretty much just fills your like field of view, whereas the 49-inch model or the 57-inch model is very like short and long. So there's lots of looking like left or right when playing games with that, and specifically for mini maps and heads-up displays and speedos when you're doing racing games, all those kind of things. Now, with those tests aside, I'm not the kind of tech reviewer who does like in-depth stats and comparisons and benchmark tests. I'm sure there are other reviews out there who already compare contrast and color and calibration and brightness and all those kind of things. So all I'm going to do here is go off my actual experience of using this thing daily. Now, firstly, in terms of HDR, I've had issues with using HDR on other ultra-wide screens. Now, my experience is mostly on the Samsung's ultra-wide range of screens because I buy all of the Samsung screens. Now, I actually ended up switching HDR off in both Windows and Mac desktops because it just does something really weird with the colors. So I'm glad to see that the LG UltraGear doesn't do this at all. Like I can switch on HDR inside of Windows and inside of Mac, and there are no like weird color issues, which means launching games is so much better, but since you'd have to like constantly toggle it on and off when switching between games and like productivity stuff. And of course, being an OLED, the colors are just fantastic, like deep blacks, great contrast, punchy, like saturated colors when you need them, plenty bright enough for use in really any lighting conditions. Now, one thing I am hugely grateful for over my 57-inch mini LED screen that I've been using is going back to an OLED screen again. Honestly, just seeing the screen boot up each morning with that awful haloing around the boot logo on the G9 is enough to make me want to go back to an OLED screen, like even if it's not that noticeable in day-to-day use. But having said that, I don't recommend this monitor if your main purpose for using it is productivity. Like the pixels per inch and the resolution just make everything look a bit pixelated. And with a monitor honestly this big, it would be nice to have a much higher resolution so everything is that little bit smaller and you can fit more on your screen at one time. So when you're using it as a desktop PC for like non-gaming stuff, now if you're watching videos, it's also not going to be bad. It'll actually perform very, very well with, you know, nice, rich OLED kind of colors. But if you are doing things like web browsing and writing up documents, you're going to be better off with a much higher resolution monitor. Now, if you do work during the day and then game in the evening, then it's going to be a choice that you'll need to make as to whether you're happy working with the lower resolution during the day to then benefit from the extra quality and performance at night when playing games. Now, speaking of gaming, quickly touching on console gaming now, neither the PS5 or the Xbox supports the 21:9 aspect ratio, and you'll find that by default the screen will just stretch the image, but you can fix that by adjusting the aspect ratio to original. It does mean you get those black bars down the side, but that's aside, it does work just fine. Now on the PS5, you'll get 120Hz with HDR and VRR, and on the Xbox, you'll get 120Hz with VRR, or you can have 4K 60Hz HDR with VRR. In terms of other features, you'll get full picture-in-picture and picture-by-picture support, and you can use this to have two separate sources together. Now, one thing on one side, one thing on the other side. I did try this with a Windows PC on the left-hand side and hooking up my Mac to the right-hand side, and my PC went to 120Hz, and the Mac only got 50 or maybe even 60Hz. Now, in terms of other like miscellaneous features, there are also two 7-watt built-in speakers, which do sound reasonable, but for most people, you're going to want to either buy a proper set of speakers or a set of headphones. The on-screen menu, actually, I really like this. You use the little kind of nipple control down here at the bottom. It's fast, it's responsive, there are no like delays on anything. It's actually one of the reasons I love these non-smart on-screen menus. Now with the Samsung Tizen menu on their smart kind of screens, they can be honestly so laggy. It's really, really unbearable at times where the interface just pauses and sits there whilst it's waiting for it to think, I guess. So I'm just glad the interface here is fast, it's easy, it works really, really well. Now, the one thing weirdly missing though is a remote control. Now, I didn't find one in the box, there's not one listed on the website, but I am a little confused as I'm sure the last version did come with a remote control, so I don't know if I'm just missing it or not, but that would be a nice extra to have here just to save you kind of reaching out and using the little nipple on the bottom of the screen. Like I know a lot of people would like playing with that. So, a great gaming monitor, but what about the problems? Now, resolution is of course my biggest gripe here, along with the low pixels per inch. I really think a screen of this size needs a higher resolution, but combined with USB-C, that would make this such a good all-rounder for both gaming and productivity. I wish the stand also had that flat base to it rather than the legs which kind of stick out and take up the desk space. But I am glad it has support for VESA mounting, and the LED lighting on the back just still isn't bright enough to be actually worth using. I normally end up just switching them off, but honestly, it's no better or no worse than anyone else is doing on their screens at the moment. And what about the alternatives? Why would you get one of these over, say, one of my favorites, the 49-inch Samsung G9 OLED? Well, the Samsung G9 OLED isn't problem-free either, and doesn't have things like USB-C support. That's a big thing for me on this screen. USB-C support is such a killer feature to have. They also have that really awful Tizen interface on the G9 screens, and it has a much shallower curve. Now, I'd actually say this screen is much more usable than the Samsung Arc Generation 2 or Generation 1 even, which I felt just as a gaming monitor, it was, well, A, just way too large on itself, and B, it had that weird, like, huge One Connect box that's kind of basically a curved gaming TV, not a gaming monitor. But they still mark it as a monitor. It's just a bit of a weird feature to have. So, even though this is an expensive screen, in my eyes, if your main focus is for gaming, then this screen continues to be a fantastic choice. Like, I love the updates they made to this year's model. There's still some way to go, yes, sure. Hopefully that might come in the next model. But if you game and you have the budget, this screen is by far one of the best that you can buy. But until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.